The glow of my laptop screen burns my eyes at 11:47 p.m. But I need Eleanor's opinion on these two color palettes before tomorrow's client meeting. I pull up our text thread and type quickly, my fingers clumsy with exhaustion. Help me choose between the blue set and the green. I attach the images and hit send before I notice the autocorrect has mangled my message into something else entirely, and worse, far worse, the recipient name at the top isn't Eleanor Whitmore, but a number I don't recognize. My stomach drops. The text reads, "Help me," and nothing else. No context, no images, just those two words sitting there like a scream in the darkness. I stare at the screen trying to figure out how this happened, how my phone betrayed me so completely. I think about sending a follow-up explanation, but that seems more awkward than just leaving it. Whoever received it will ignore a wrong number text. People get them all the time. I set the phone down and turn back to my laptop, but unease prickles at the back of my neck. Minutes pass, maybe 10, maybe 15, and I'm deep in adjusting color values when I hear something outside my apartment door. Footsteps, multiple sets, moving with purpose, not the usual shuffle of my neighbors coming home late. My building is old, the door's thin, and I can hear low voices, a word that sounds like clear, another that might be ready. My heart starts hammering because this doesn't feel right, doesn't feel normal. Then my door explodes inward, not knocked, not picked, but forced open with a violence that sends the chain lock flying across my small living room. I scream, a raw sound of pure terror as men pour into my space, three of them, large and dressed in dark clothing that screams danger. And behind them comes a man who fills the doorway like he owns not just the frame, but the entire building, the entire world. He's tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a suit that probably costs more than my monthly rent, and he's holding a gun with the casual ease of someone who uses one regularly. His eyes scan my apartment with cold precision, then land on me frozen on my couch. He moves toward me, and I scramble backward, my laptop tumbling to the floor. His face is all hard angles and shadows, a scar cutting through his left eyebrow down to his cheekbone, and those eyes are the color of winter storms. He demands in a voice like gravel and silk combined, "Who hurt you?" And I can't process the question because I'm too busy trying to understand why this is happening. I manage to stammer that no one hurt me, this is a mistake, but he's not listening. He gestures, and his men spread through my apartment, opening closets, checking my bedroom, moving with military efficiency. I find my voice and tell him to get out. I'll call the police. This is breaking and entering. He looks at me like I'm speaking another language. He asks who I sent the message to, why I texted him for help. I try to explain about Eleanor, about autocorrect, about the wrong number, and I can see he doesn't believe me. His jaw tightens, and he moves to my kitchen, my bathroom, searching for evidence of whatever threat he expected to find. I notice everything about him because terror sharpens details into brutal clarity, the expensive watch on his wrist catching the light, the way his men defer to him without him speaking, the controlled power in every movement. He returns to stand in front of me, and I have to tilt my head back to meet his eyes. He tells me his men are going to sweep the apartment thoroughly, and I need to sit down and stay calm. Calm feels impossible. One of his men calls out from my bedroom, his tone sharp, and the dangerous stranger's expression darkens into something truly frightening. He looks at me with new assessment, new concern, and says words that turn my blood to ice. "You have a bigger problem than a wrong number." I follow the man into my bedroom and freeze in the doorway. One of his team is crouched by my bookshelf, holding something small and black between gloved fingers. Something that doesn't belong there, something I've never seen before. The dangerous stranger moves past me with controlled urgency and takes the object, examining it with the focus of someone who knows exactly what he's looking at. He says one word that makes my stomach drop even further: surveillance. I hear myself ask what that means, but I already know. The answer is written in the grim set of his jaw and the way his eyes sweep my bedroom with new assessment. He tells me someone's been watching me, and based on the equipment quality, they've been doing it professionally. My knees go weak, and I grab the doorframe for support because this can't be real. Things like this don't happen to people like me. I'm nobody. A freelance graphic designer who spends Friday nights choosing between color palettes, not someone worth surveilling. He's already moving through the rest of my apartment, and his men follow his silent commands, checking every corner, every surface. They find two more devices, one in my living room hidden in a plant I bought last month from the farmer's market, another in the bathroom tucked behind the mirror. Each discovery feels like a violation, the privacy I thought I had revealed as complete fiction. The stranger makes a phone call, his voice low and clipped, speaking in some kind of code I can't follow. He says things like site compromised and asset exposed and primary extraction. I demand to know what's happening, my voice shaking but growing stronger with anger now alongside the fear. He looks at me with those winter storm eyes and tells me I'm not safe here. Whoever planted these devices knows everything about my routines, my vulnerabilities, my life. I ask who he is, why he came when I texted, why any of this is happening. He ignores the questions and makes another call, this one even more terse. Minutes later, I hear footsteps in my hallway again, and three more men enter, one of them older with sharp features and an air of authority that almost matches the stranger. The stranger addresses him as Henry, and they confer in low voices while I stand there invisible and terrified. Finally, the stranger turns back to me and says, I'm coming with him until they determine who's targeting me and why. I laugh, actually laugh, because the absurdity has reached critical mass. I tell him absolutely not. I'm calling the police right now. He moves faster than I expect, plucking my phone from my hand before I can dial. He tells me the police can't protect me from whoever has this level of resources, and besides, if I involve them, I'll be dead within 24 hours. The casual certainty in his voice is more frightening than anything else so far. I tell him he can't just take me. This is kidnapping. He says I have a choice. Come willingly, or he'll carry me out. But either way, I'm leaving this apartment in the next 5 minutes. I look at Henry and the other men, but find no help there, just professional detachment. The stranger moves closer, and I catch his scent, something expensive and dangerous, cedar and gunpowder and leather. He tells me to pack essentials, clothing for 3 days, medications, anything I can't live without. I ask where he's taking me. He says somewhere secure. I ask again who he is. He studies me for a long moment and then says his name like it should mean something. Alexander Sinclair. My blood turns to ice because I do know that name. Everyone in this city knows that name. He's been on the news, in the papers, always in the background of stories about organized crime and political corruption and bodies found in the harbor. I'm looking at the most dangerous man in the city, and he's telling me I'm in danger. The irony would be funny if I wasn't about to pass out. He sees the recognition in my face, and something flickers in his expression, almost like regret. He tells me again to pack, and this time I move on autopilot, going to my closet and pulling out a bag with shaking hands. I sit wedged between Alexander and Henry in the back of a black SUV that smells like leather and gun oil and expensive cologne. My duffel bag is at my feet and my mind races in circles trying to make sense of what's happening. I'm nobody. I design logos and websites and marketing materials for small businesses that can barely afford my modest rates. I live in a 600 square foot apartment in a neighborhood that's optimistically called up and coming. I haven't been on a real vacation in 3 years. I buy my clothes from outlet stores and my furniture from secondhand shops. There is absolutely no reason anyone would want to watch me, to surveil me with military-grade equipment, as Alexander called it. The thought keeps circling. Why me? Why me? Why me? I sneak glances at Alexander and find him watching me with those storm-colored eyes that miss nothing. His phone rings constantly, and he answers in clipped monosyllables, issuing orders that sound innocuous but feel weighted with menace. He tells someone to secure the perimeter. He tells someone else to run a full background on recent contracts. He says something in rapid Italian that makes Henry shift beside me. I catch words that sound like territory and incursion and retaliation. This is his world, I realize, a world of codes and violence and power plays I can't begin to understand. I ask where we're going, and Alexander tells me somewhere safe. I ask how long I'll be there, and he says as long as necessary. I ask what gives him the right to decide my life, and he turns those eyes on me fully and says the surveillance equipment in my bedroom gives him the right, because whoever planted it will come for me, and I won't survive that encounter. The certainty in his voice terrifies me more than anything else tonight. We've left the city now, and we're on a highway that cuts through darkness, heading into the hills where the wealthy keep their estates behind gates and walls. The drive takes 40 minutes and no one speaks except for Alexander's occasional terse phone conversations. I watch lights flash past and try to remember if I locked my apartment door before leaving, which is insane, because the door is broken and there are surveillance devices hidden in my possessions, and locking it is the least of my problems. Finally, we turn off onto a private road marked only by a number on a stone pillar. Gates swing open automatically as we approach and close behind us with mechanical finality. The driveway winds through manicured grounds lit by subtle landscape lighting, and then the house comes into view. It's massive, all modern lines and glass and stone, more like a fortress than a home. We pull up to the front entrance where more men wait, these ones in suits with earpieces visible. Alexander gets out and I follow because staying in the car isn't an option. Inside is all marble and metal and cold beauty, the kind of design that costs more money than I'll make in my lifetime. A woman appears, older and elegant, and Alexander tells her to prepare the East Wing guest suite. He turns to me and says he'll have someone bring my things and I should rest. I laugh because rest seems impossible. I tell him I need answers. I need to understand what's happening. I need my life back. He studies me with something that might be sympathy and says what I need is to stay alive and everything else is secondary. Henry appears with my bag and Alexander gestures for me to follow. We walk through hallways that echo with emptiness until he opens a door to a bedroom that's bigger than my entire apartment. He tells me not to leave the grounds and I ask if I'm a prisoner. He says I'm protected, and there's a difference. I ask what difference exactly, and he says prisoners don't get a choice about staying safe. His tone makes it clear this conversation is over. He leaves, and I'm alone in this beautiful cage. I try my phone and find no signal. I try the door and find a guard standing outside who nods politely but doesn't move when I ask to leave. The reality crashes over me like cold water. Alexander Sinclair, the most dangerous man in the city, has taken me, and I have absolutely no control over what happens next. I don't sleep. I lie in the enormous bed with its 1,000 thread-count sheets that probably cost more than my monthly rent, and stare at the ceiling while my mind spins through everything that's happened in the past 6 hours. Someone's been watching me, recording me, documenting my life through hidden cameras I never suspected. Alexander Sinclair, the kind of man mothers warn their daughters about in whispered tones, has taken me from my home and brought me to this fortress. I'm simultaneously terrified and angry, the emotions taking turns dominating until I can't distinguish one from the other. Around 4 in the morning, I give up on sleep and explore the room properly, opening drawers to find them empty, checking the windows to find them locked, testing the door to confirm what I already know. The guard outside doesn't acknowledge me when I open it. I close it again and lean against the solid wood, feeling the trapped sensation crawl over my skin like insects. When dawn finally breaks and pale light filters through the floor to ceiling windows, I shower in the marble bathroom with its rainfall shower head and luxury products, then dress in yesterday's clothes because they're all I have. I venture out and the guard steps aside without comment. The house is silent except for the distant sounds of activity somewhere deeper in its maze of rooms. I wander through hallways decorated with abstract art that's probably worth more than I'll earn in my lifetime, past rooms with purposes I can only guess at. I find a kitchen that's all gleaming stainless steel and black granite where a woman in her 50s is preparing coffee. She startles when she sees me, then recovers and offers me breakfast with professional courtesy. I accept because I need something to do with my hands. She tells me her name is Marie, and she's been with Alexander for 8 years. I want to ask her what that means, what it's like working for a man like him, but I don't know how to frame the questions. I take my coffee and continue exploring, finding a library that makes my heart ache with its floor-to-ceiling shelves and rolling ladder and leather furniture. Then a living area with windows overlooking manicured grounds that stretch toward distant tree lines. Everything is beautiful and cold and empty. I find a house phone on a side table and stare at it for a long moment before picking it up. It has a dial tone. I punch in Eleanor's number from memory, my hands shaking. She answers on the third ring, voice thick with sleep, and I almost cry at the sound of something familiar and safe. I start to tell her I'm okay, that something happened but I'm fine, when the phone is plucked from my hand. Alexander stands beside me, and I didn't hear him approach. He ends the call with one press of his finger. I round on him, anger, finally winning over fear. I demand to know what gives him the right to control who I talk to. He tells me in that maddeningly calm voice that any contact with my old life creates risk. I tell him he's kidnapped me. He says he saved me. I laugh bitterly and say there's a difference. He moves closer and I catch that scent again. Cedar and something darker. And he's too close, his presence overwhelming in the spacious room. He tells me his people are working to identify who's targeting me and why. I ask why he cares, and he studies me with those storm-colored eyes that reveal nothing. The silence stretches taut between us. Then Henry appears in the doorway and says they've traced the surveillance equipment's origin. It's connected to Thomas Chamberlain. Alexander's expression darkens, and Henry continues that Chamberlain is Alexander's primary rival, locked in a territory dispute that's been escalating for months. But neither of them can answer the question that matters most. Why would someone like Chamberlain target someone like me? Alexander takes me to his office and Henry follows, closing the door behind us with a soft click that somehow feels ominous. Alexander gestures for me to sit in one of the leather chairs facing his massive desk, but he remains standing, pacing with restless energy that makes me nervous. He asks me to tell him about everyone in my life, and I blink at the abrupt command. He clarifies that he needs to understand the connection between me and Chamberlain, why his rival would target me specifically, and the only way to find that connection is to map out every person and interaction in my world. I start talking, feeling exposed and small. I tell him about Eleanor, my best friend since college, who works in marketing and has no connection to anything criminal that I know of. I tell him about my coworkers at the small design firm where I freelance, listing their names and roles, all of them ordinary people living ordinary lives. I tell him about my clients, mostly local businesses and startups who hire me for logos and website design, people who pay in installments because their budgets are as tight as mine. Nothing sounds significant. Nothing connects to the world of organized crime and territory disputes. Alexander stops pacing and asks about my family, and I feel my throat tighten, because this is the wound that never fully heals. I tell him I'm estranged from my father who left when I was 8. Just walked out one day and never came back. No explanation, no contact since. I tell him my mother raised me alone, worked 2 jobs to keep us afloat, died of an aneurysm 3 years ago with no warning, just gone between one heartbeat and the next. I tell him there are no siblings, no aunts or uncles I know, no extended family who stayed in touch. I'm alone in the world except for Eleanor and my small circle of acquaintances. Alexander's expression shifts when I talk about my mother, and I see something flicker in those storm-colored eyes. Something that might be recognition or sympathy or shared understanding of loss. He asks more gently about my recent work, and I run through the past few months of projects. A logo for a boutique clothing store, a website redesign for a yoga studio, marketing materials for a nonprofit, then a logo for a new restaurant that opened downtown 6 weeks ago. The owner wanted something elegant but approachable, and I met with him twice to discuss the design direction. Alexander goes very still and asks what restaurant. I tell him the name, Opal and Ash, and watch his jaw tighten. He exchanges a look with Henry that I can't interpret. He asks if I met with anyone else besides the owner, and I remember the business manager who sat in on the second meeting, a thin man with cold eyes who made me uncomfortable. Alexander sits finally, leaning back in his chair, and tells me that Opal and Ash is a front for Chamberlain's money laundering operation, that the restaurant itself is legitimate, but it's designed to clean money from drug trafficking and extortion. I feel the blood drain from my face. He continues that Chamberlain is paranoid and meticulous, that anyone who gets access to the business files or financial information becomes a potential security risk. I protest that I never saw any files. I just designed a logo. But Alexander points out that I met with them twice, that I might have seen something on a computer screen or overheard a conversation, or simply know enough about their timeline and operations to be considered a loose end. The reality settles over me like ice water. I'm caught in a mob war because I designed a logo for the wrong client, because I took a job I desperately needed without asking enough questions, because my life is so precarious financially that I can't afford to turn down work. Alexander watches me process this and says, Chamberlain won't take the risk that I know something or saw something, that in his world it's easier to eliminate a potential problem than to verify whether the problem actually exists. I ask in a voice I barely recognize as my own if Alexander really believes Chamberlain would kill me over a logo design. Alexander leans forward and says with absolute certainty that Chamberlain has killed for much less. The fear that's been simmering in my chest since this nightmare began suddenly boils over into something close to panic. Alexander comes around the desk and crouches in front of my chair so we're eye level, and says in a voice that's almost gentle that no one will touch me, that he won't allow it. I ask why he cares about protecting someone he doesn't know, and he studies my face for a long moment before saying that what happens on his watch is his responsibility. The fierce protectiveness in his voice sends an unexpected shiver through me that has nothing to do with fear. I shouldn't find comfort in a promise from a criminal, shouldn't feel safer with a mafia boss than I did in my own apartment. But I do, and that realization is almost as terrifying as everything else that's happened. Days settle into a rhythm that feels surreal in its domesticity, considering the circumstances that brought me here. I wake each morning in the bedroom that no longer feels quite like a prison, and make my way to the library, where morning light slants through tall windows and illuminates thousands of books arranged with meticulous care. I bring my coffee, prepared now by my own hands in the enormous kitchen, where Marie has stopped startling at my presence and instead greets me with quiet warmth. I spend mornings reading, letting myself get lost in other people's stories and other people's problems, a temporary escape from the strangeness of my own situation. In the afternoons, I work on my laptop, the secured one Henry provided after I explained that I had deadlines and clients depending on me and a freelance career that would evaporate if I simply disappeared. He arranged everything with efficiency that surprised me, setting up encrypted access and monitoring my communications for safety. I design logos and websites from a mafia boss's estate and try not to think too hard about the absurdity. Alexander appears at unpredictable intervals, checking on me with questions that are terse but not unkind, his presence filling whatever room he enters with an energy I feel in my chest. I notice things about him I shouldn't notice, details I have no business cataloging. The lights in the east wing where his office is located burn past 3 in the morning most nights. I know because I watch from my window, wondering what keeps him awake, what decisions he's making in those dark hours. He takes calls in Italian and Russian, his voice carrying through halls when he forgets to close doors completely, the unfamiliar languages somehow making him seem even more dangerous. His knuckles are bruised some days, split and swollen, and I wonder what or who he's been hitting. I shouldn't be curious about any of this, but curiosity winds through me like smoke, impossible to contain. One evening I find him in the library, my sanctuary that he's invading, sitting in one of the leather chairs with a crystal tumbler of whiskey catching lamplight. He looks exhausted, shadows under his eyes, his usually immaculate appearance slightly disheveled with his collar open and sleeves rolled to his elbows. I almost retreat, but he notices me and gestures to the other chair in a silent invitation. We sit in careful silence for several minutes before he asks about my work, what I'm designing currently, and I find myself showing him my portfolio because the questions seemed genuine. He studies each piece with focus that surprises me, making observations about visual composition and color theory that reveal knowledge I didn't expect from someone in his profession. I ask how he knows about design, and he admits his mother was a painter before she died, that he grew up surrounded by art and conversations about beauty. The personal detail feels significant. I ask how he ended up in this life and watch his expression shudder slightly. He deflects at first, then offers a sliver of truth like he's testing whether I can handle it. Family legacy, he says. No choice in the matter. Born into it. Raised for it. Too deep now to ever find a way out. The resignation in his voice catches something in my chest. The conversation flows easier than it should between a captive and her captor, between a civilian and a criminal. I realize as we talk that he's lonely despite being constantly surrounded by people, that command and fear create isolation even in a crowded room. The awareness creates an unexpected intimacy in the quiet library, with night pressing against the windows. Our eyes hold a moment too long, and I see something flicker in those storm-colored depths, something that mirrors the strange pull I feel toward him. Then he stands abruptly and leaves without another word, and I'm left sitting alone, confused by my own disappointment that he didn't stay. Grace Pembroke arrives on a clear Wednesday afternoon in a silver sedan, driven by someone I don't recognize, and I watch from the library window as she emerges with effortless elegance, her silver hair swept into a soft chignon, wearing a camel coat that probably costs more than 3 months of my former rent. She's older, maybe early 60s, but moves with the grace of someone who's always been comfortable in her own skin. And I feel suddenly self-conscious in my jeans and sweater borrowed from a shopping delivery Henry arranged. Alexander meets her at the door, and I see his posture change, tension bleeding from his shoulders as she embraces him, and I realize this is someone who matters to him in a way few people do. When he brings her to meet me, her eyes are sharp and assessing but kind, and she takes my hands in hers like we're already friends. Over tea in the sunlit breakfast room, Grace tells me stories about Alexander that reshape my understanding of him completely. She raised him after his parents were murdered when he was 16, took him into her home when the rest of the family was scrambling for power and position, gave him stability in the aftermath of unimaginable violence. She speaks of a boy who stopped sleeping for months, who had nightmares that left him screaming, who took on responsibilities no teenager should carry because the organization his father built would have torn itself apart without leadership. She tells me his heart is better than he believes, that the choices he's made have been survival rather than preference, and I see the love in her eyes when she speaks of him. She warns me gently that his world is dangerous and will remain dangerous, that loving him means accepting fear as a constant companion, but she squeezes my hands when she says it, and I understand she's giving her blessing, even as she cautions me. We're still talking when the alarms shatter the afternoon quiet, blaring sounds that make Grace go still and make my heart lurch into my throat. Alexander appears instantly with Henry and 4 other men, all armed, moving with coordinated precision that speaks of rehearsal and preparation. Henry reaches me first, pulling me from my chair, and Alexander's giving rapid orders in a voice gone cold and commanding. Grace is already moving toward a different part of the house, clearly knowing protocols I don't. I'm half carried toward a door I've never noticed before, hidden behind wooden panels in the hallway, and Henry's practically lifting me down concrete stairs into a basement space that's reinforced like a bunker. Alexander appears behind us, and when his eyes meet mine, I see something I haven't seen before: real fear. Not for himself, but for me, naked and raw in his expression. He tells Henry to guard me with his life, and Henry nods once, absolute commitment in that single gesture. Alexander moves toward the stairs, and I call his name without meaning to, my voice breaking on the syllables. He turns back, crosses to me in 3 strides, and frames my face with both hands, his thumb brushing my cheekbone. He doesn't say anything, but the look in his eyes says everything. Then he's gone, taking the stairs 3 at a time, and the heavy door closes with a final thud that sounds like a coffin lid. Henry positions himself between me and the door, weapon drawn, and I realize I'm shaking. I ask what's happening, but he doesn't answer, his attention fixed on the door and whatever threats lie beyond it. Time becomes strange and elastic. I hear sounds above us, muffled by concrete and steel but unmistakable. Gunfire, shouting, something heavy crashing. My terror ratchets higher with each sound, and I find myself sinking to the floor because my legs won't hold me anymore. Henry remains standing, utterly still, and I wonder how he can be so calm. More gunfire, closer now, and I realize with crystalline clarity that I'm not just terrified for myself. I'm terrified for Alexander, picturing him upstairs, facing whatever threat Chamberlain has sent. And the strength of that fear reveals something I've been avoiding acknowledging. I care about him, more than care. The recognition hits at the worst possible moment, locked in a basement while violence unfolds above. Then silence, sudden and complete, more frightening than the noise. Henry's grip on his weapon tightens. We wait in that terrible silence for seconds that feel like hours. Finally, footsteps on the stairs. Henry raises his gun. The door opens and Alexander stands there, alive, whole, with blood spattered across his white shirt, but moving normally. Our eyes lock and everything I feel must show on my face because his expression shifts, softens, despite the violence he's just survived. I'm on my feet without deciding to move, and he's crossing to me, and then his arms are around me, and I'm breathing again. Alexander keeps me in the safe room for another hour while he deals with what remains of Chamberlain's failed assault. And when Henry finally comes to retrieve me, the sun is just beginning to paint the eastern sky in shades of rose and gold that seem obscene after the violence of the night. He leads me upstairs through hallways that smell of cleaning chemicals sharp enough to burn my nostrils, and I see staff members I recognize scrubbing at marble floors with methodical efficiency, erasing evidence of blood that pooled there while I cowered below. The reality of his world confronts me with visceral force, not abstract anymore, but concrete and terrible. Men died here just hours ago, and now their deaths are being erased like they never existed at all. Henry brings me to Alexander's private office, a room I have never entered before with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the grounds and furniture that speaks of wealth accumulated over generations. Alexander is standing with his back to the door, phone pressed to his ear, speaking in rapid Italian that sounds like commands, and when he turns and sees me, something in his expression fractures before he controls it again. He ends the call without pleasantries and crosses to me in 3 strides, his hands framing my face as he searches for damage he will not find. He pours brandy into a crystal tumbler despite the early hour, the amber liquid catching morning light, and presses it into my hands that are shaking badly enough that I nearly spill it. I drink, and the burn down my throat grounds me slightly in my body that feels disconnected and strange. He sits beside me on the leather sofa, closer than necessary, our thighs touching, and the warmth of him draws me like gravity, so I lean into his side without thinking about the implications. He stiffens for just a moment, then his arm comes around my shoulders and I feel him exhale slowly. I ask if this will ever end, if Chamberlain will keep coming, and he is silent long enough that I think he will not answer before he admits with blunt honesty that Chamberlain will not stop until one of them is eliminated. Either Alexander dies or I die, or Chamberlain himself is removed from the board permanently. The truth should terrify me, but instead it is almost comforting after so many evasions and half-explanations. He tells me he is arranging to take Chamberlain out first, to end this threat before it can touch me again, and his voice carries the weight of decisions already made and resources already mobilized. I should be horrified that he is planning murder, that I am the reason for violence being set in motion, but I feel only numb acceptance because what choice is there now? I ask what happens to me after Chamberlain is gone, when the threat is neutralized and I am no longer in danger, and he says I can return to my life, to my apartment, and my work, and my friend Eleanor, back to the ordinary existence I had before his world collided with mine. The prospect sounds completely empty, a life that belonged to a different version of me, who no longer exists. I look at him, really look, at him with blood still spattered on his collar and exhaustion carved into the lines around his eyes, and I ask what if I do not want to go back? The question hangs in the air between us, changing the shape of everything. His jaw tightens and I watch tension climb his spine. He tells me carefully that I do not know what I am saying, that trauma and fear are clouding my judgment. I argue back that I know exactly what I am saying, that I am not a child to be dismissed or patronized, and the tension shifts from danger into something else entirely, something that crackles between us like electricity before a storm. Alexander stands abruptly, and the movement feels violent in the charged quiet of his office, putting deliberate distance between us like I am something dangerous he needs to escape, and when he speaks his voice has gone cold and clinical. In that way I am learning means he is protecting himself from feeling too much. He tells me I am experiencing trauma bonding, nothing more. That fear and proximity have created false intimacy that will evaporate once the danger passes and I return to normal life. His dismissal lands like a slap, and I feel my own anger rising to meet his retreat, hot and clarifying in my chest. I argue back that I am not a child, and I know my own mind, that I understand the difference between gratitude and whatever this is growing between us. And he counters with barely controlled intensity that his world has destroyed everyone he has ever cared about, that caring for people in his life is a death sentence he will not impose on me. I ask if that is what I am now, someone he cares about, and the question makes him freeze with his back still toward me. He does not answer, and the silence stretches taut between us, his non-answer somehow more revealing than any words could be. Finally, he tells me to get some rest, his tone suggesting dismissal, but I refuse to be sent away like an inconvenient problem to be managed. I cross the distance he created and stop inches from him, close enough to see the muscle jumping in his jaw and the rigid control in his shoulders. I ask what he wants, not what he thinks is right or safe, but what he actually wants, and for a long moment I think he will not answer before he admits in a voice gone rough and low that what he wants does not matter because he will not ruin me. The protectiveness and self-denial strike something deep in my chest. This man who commands an empire of violence trying to protect me from himself. I tell him I am already in this, already ruined by his standards, since I have watched men die and been held hostage and made choices no ordinary person makes. Might as well be worth it. Something shifts in his expression, control fraying at the edges, and he reaches out to touch my face with surprising gentleness. his thumb tracing my cheekbone like I am something precious and breakable. His hand is warm and slightly rough, and I lean into the touch without meaning to, my eyes closing for just a moment. The air between us feels electric with possibility, and I can feel his breath and smell cedar and gunpowder and something uniquely him. Then footsteps sound in the hallway outside, and Henry appears in the doorway without knocking, his expression urgent enough that he does not apologize for the interruption. He tells Alexander that one of the captured men has talked, that Chamberlain is planning something big for tomorrow night, a major move against Alexander's operations, and possibly against the estate itself. Alexander shifts instantly back to business mode, his hand dropping from my face as his entire demeanor changes into the dangerous leader who commands absolute loyalty. He is asking Henry questions in rapid succession about details and timelines and available resources. The moment between us is broken, but not forgotten, hanging in the air like unfinished music. And when his eyes meet mine briefly before he turns his full attention to Henry, I see promise there that makes my heart beat faster despite everything. Alexander mobilizes his organization for a preemptive strike against Chamberlain with the efficiency of a general preparing for war, and I watch from the margins as his estate transforms into a command center with men arriving at all hours and Henry coordinating teams with clipped precision that speaks of long practice. I am relegated to the sidelines like a piece on the board to be protected rather than a player in my own right, and the frustration builds in my chest until I cannot contain it anymore. I find Alexander in his office surrounded by maps and photographs and weapons laid out with careful precision, and I argue that I have a right to be involved since this entire conflict is about me, since Chamberlain targeted me and nearly killed me, and I deserve to be part of ending the threat. He refuses without even considering it, his expression going hard and closed in that way that means he has made his decision and expects it to be final. We fight properly this time with voices raised and careful politeness abandoned, and he tells me I do not understand what I'm asking, that combat is not some abstract thing, but brutal and ugly, and he will not watch me die. I fire back that he is treating me like property, to be protected rather than a person with agency, that he makes decisions about my life without including me as though my thoughts and choices do not matter. The accusation lands hard, and I see it hit him in the way his expression shudders completely, walls slamming down between us. He leaves without another word, and the silence he leaves behind feels like condemnation. I am shaking with anger and hurt when Grace finds me an hour later in the library, her elegant presence somehow soothing despite my agitation. She sits beside me and explains gently that everyone Alexander has ever loved has died violently, his parents murdered when he was still practically a child, and a younger sister I did not even know existed killed in retaliation when she was only 12 years old, and even a woman he once cared for caught in crossfire meant for him. He is terrified of adding me to that list of people destroyed by proximity to him, Grace tells me with sympathy in her eyes. And the revelation recontextualizes everything, all his protectiveness and control suddenly making terrible sense. That evening, Alexander comes to my room and I hear his knock, quiet and hesitant in a way he never is. He apologizes stiffly for being overbearing, the words clearly difficult for a man unused to admitting fault, and I accept because I understand now what drives his fear. He starts to leave, but I stop him with a hand on his arm, and I ask about his sister because I need him to share this pain he carries. The question cracks something in him, and I watch his control fracture as he tells me about Maria, only 12 when Chamberlain's predecessor killed her to punish their father for a territorial dispute, how Alexander found her body and has carried that image every day since. The raw pain in his voice breaks something in my chest, and I cross to him without thinking, wrapping my arms around him and simply holding him. He resists for just a moment, his body rigid with the habits of self-protection. Then his arms come around me tightly as though I am an anchor in rough seas. We stand like that for long minutes, finding comfort in each other without words, and when we finally separate, everything has changed between us. walls crumbled into something more honest and real. The next morning brings preparation for the operation against Chamberlain, and I watch Alexander transform into the dangerous leader his reputation promises, all sharp focus and absolute authority, as he coordinates his people with military precision that speaks of years commanding men in life and death situations. He is focused and commanding. Every inch the predator I first saw break into my apartment weeks ago, but now his eyes find me across rooms, and something passes between us that makes my breath catch. An acknowledgement of what happened between us last night and what it means going forward. I help where I can because sitting idle makes me feel useless and afraid. So I research Chamberlain's properties and businesses online, using the secured laptop Henry provided, cross-referencing public records and news articles and corporate filings with methodical determination. Hours into this tedious work, I discover something that makes my pulse quicken, a secondary property buried under layers of shell corporations that even Alexander's people seem to have missed in their focus on Chamberlain's known holdings. I bring it to Alexander and Henry in the command center Alexander has set up in his office, spreading my printed findings across the desk already covered with maps and surveillance photos, and I watch Alexander's expression shift as he processes what I am showing him. He is impressed despite himself, and I can see it. In the slight widening of his eyes, and the way he looks at me with new respect, and Henry leans in to examine the documents more closely while asking questions about how I found the connection. The property could be where Chamberlain is planning his strike from, Alexander says slowly, as pieces click together in his mind, a staging ground they did not anticipate because the paper trail was deliberately obscured. Alexander makes the decision quickly the way he does everything, with absolute certainty once he commits to a course of action. Henry will take the main team to Chamberlain's known location as planned, maintaining the appearance of their expected strategy, while Alexander takes a smaller group to the secondary property with the element of surprise on their side. It is a calculated risk, but the kind Alexander has built his empire on. I ask to come, and the words are out before I fully think them through, but I mean them completely. He refuses immediately, as I knew he would, his jaw tightening with that stubborn protectiveness I have come to recognize. I argue that I found it so I deserve to see it through, but more than that, I cannot sit safely behind while he walks into danger, cannot spend hours not knowing if he is alive or dead. He searches my face, and I let him see everything I feel, all my determination and fear and desperate need to be there. Against every instinct I can see warring in his expression. He agrees, but I must stay in the vehicle with guards, removed from direct danger. The compromise is not what I wanted, but more than I expected. The drive to the port is tense with anticipation, and I sit in the back of the SUV watching Alexander brief his team with quiet intensity, noting the efficiency and absolute loyalty his men show, the way they prepare weapons and check equipment with practiced ease. We arrive at an industrial building near the waterfront, all rusted metal and broken windows that somehow feels more ominous in the darkness. Alexander tells me to stay put, no matter what, and his tone brooks no argument. Their eyes hold for a long moment, and I tell him to be careful, the words inadequate for everything I mean. He almost smiles and touches my face briefly, before he is gone into the darkness with his men, swallowed by shadows and danger, and I am left waiting with fear like ice in my chest. I wait in the SUV with 2 guards, and every minute feels like an eternity stretching out in the darkness, my hands clenched together in my lap as I strain to hear anything from the building that swallowed Alexander and his men just minutes ago. The silence is almost worse than noise would be, because at least noise would tell me something is happening, would give me information instead of this terrible not knowing that makes my imagination conjure every awful possibility. Then I hear it. Gunfire, sharp cracks that shatter the quiet, and my heart stops completely in my chest. More shots, a rapid staccato that speaks of chaos and violence, then silence again that somehow feels even more ominous than before. The guard in the passenger seat tenses and reaches for his radio, But before he can speak, chaos erupts around us like a trap springing closed. Men pour from the building, but they are not Alexander's men. I can tell by the way they move, and the unfamiliar faces visible in the dim light from the warehouse. These are Chamberlain's people. The guards with me react instantly, the driver starting the engine with a roar while the other brings his weapon up, but more vehicles appear from nowhere and block us in with deliberate precision that speaks of planning. Chamberlain planned for this possibility. I realize with ice flooding my veins. He anticipated that Alexander might discover this location, might split his forces, might bring me along. The guards tell me to get down, and I start to duck, but then gunfire shatters the windows in an explosion of glass that rains down on me. The guard in the passenger seat slumps forward, and I see blood spreading across his shirt, and I scream without meaning to, the sound torn from my throat by pure terror. The other guard tries to return fire, but we are overwhelmed by sheer numbers, men surrounding the vehicle from all sides, and I know with absolute certainty that this is not going to end well. The door beside me is wrenched open with violent force, and hands grab me, dragging me out of the SUV before I can even think to resist effectively. I fight anyway, kicking and clawing and trying to break free, but it is useless against their strength and numbers. A man steps into my line of sight, and I recognize him from news photos Alexander showed me during the planning sessions. Thomas Chamberlain himself with cold eyes and a smile that holds no warmth at all. He looks down at me with satisfaction that makes my skin crawl and tells me I have proven more useful than he imagined, drawing Sinclair out perfectly into a trap he should have seen coming. I realize with horror that crashes over me like a wave that they were expected. That Chamberlain anticipated exactly this move and turned my discovery into bait. I am dragged into the building with Chamberlain's hand ironed tight on my arm, through a door and into a warehouse space that opens up vast and shadowy before me. Inside, I see Alexander's men pinned down behind shipping containers, returning fire against superior numbers. And then I see Alexander himself, and our eyes meet across the distance. His expression transforms into something murderous and terrible when he sees me captive, a rage so pure it is almost physical. Chamberlain positions me in front of him like a shield, and I feel the cold press of a gun barrel against my temple, the metal hard and unforgiving. He calls out his terms in a voice that echoes through the warehouse, telling Alexander to surrender and leave the city forever, or watch me die right here. Clara's terror is absolute and overwhelming, flooding every cell of my body with the certainty that I am going to die in this cold warehouse, that my stupidity in insisting on coming has destroyed everything and everyone I care about. Alexander is calculating even in crisis, and I can see his mind working as he assesses angles and positions and possibilities with the cold precision that has kept him alive and in power for years. He tells Chamberlain there is no guarantee he will release me, even if he surrenders, his voice steady and measured despite the gun pressed to my temple and the impossible situation we are trapped in. Chamberlain actually laughs at that, a sound without warmth that echoes through the warehouse, and agrees that Alexander is right because his plan is to kill us both regardless. He is just enjoying the moment, savoring his victory before he takes everything from the man who has been a thorn in his side for too long. The gun barrel presses harder against my temple until I can feel it leaving an impression in my skin, cold metal that promises death with the smallest pressure. Alexander's eyes lock on mine across the warehouse space that suddenly feels both vast and suffocatingly small, and I see him making a decision in the subtle shift of his expression. He says something low to Henry, words I cannot hear, but that make Henry argue back with urgent intensity visible even from this distance. Alexander insists with a sharp gesture, and Henry's resistance crumbles into grim acceptance. Then Alexander does the unthinkable and steps out from cover with his hands visible and empty, walking toward Chamberlain and me with measured steps that make my heart stop completely. I scream at him to stop, the word torn from my throat, but he keeps coming with his eyes never leaving mine. Chamberlain is triumphant, and I can feel it in the way his body language changes. tension releasing into satisfaction as he watches his enemy surrender. But I know Alexander better now than Chamberlain realizes, and I understand with sudden clarity that he is buying time, creating a distraction that his men can use. Henry and the others are repositioning with careful silence, using Alexander's sacrifice to gain advantage. I realize what is happening when I spot movement in my peripheral vision, figures shifting in the shadows while Chamberlain focuses entirely on Alexander's approach. I make a choice in that instant, the only choice I have. I drop suddenly with all my weight becoming dead and uncooperative, throwing off Chamberlain's grip through sheer unexpected momentum. His hand slips, and the gun moves away from my head for just a fraction of a second. Alexander is already moving before I even hit the ground, his weapon appearing from somewhere and coming up with fluid speed. Everything happens in seconds that feel stretched and compressed simultaneously. Gunfire erupts from multiple directions in a deafening chaos of sound. I cover my head with my arms and make myself as small as possible on the cold concrete. Bodies hit the ground around me with heavy thuds. Then strong, familiar hands pull me up and I look into Alexander's face as he checks me frantically for injuries, his hands running over me with desperate thoroughness. I am unhurt somehow, miraculously intact. Around us, Alexander's men have secured the warehouse with military efficiency, weapons trained on the remaining enemies who are surrendering or already dead. Chamberlain is on the ground clutching his shoulder where blood seeps through his expensive shirt, wounded but alive. Alexander is shaking, and I realize it is with adrenaline and fear, emotions he never shows. He pulls me against him hard with his face buried in my hair and his arms like steel bands. I cling back just as tightly with my fingers gripping his jacket, both of us breathing hard and alive and together. We are both alive despite everything. It is over finally, truly over. The aftermath is controlled chaos with police and officials on Alexander's payroll arriving to clean the scene with efficient silence that speaks of long practice at making violence disappear into paperwork and convenient explanations. Chamberlain is taken away in an ambulance flanked by patrol cars, his destination either prison or somewhere quieter and more permanent depending on decisions being made above my comprehension level. Alexander keeps me close through all of it, with his hand on me constantly, sometimes at my lower back and sometimes gripping my hand, as though he needs the physical contact to reassure himself that I am real and whole and still here beside him. Henry drives us back to the estate himself, leaving others to handle the cleanup operations, and his eyes meet Alexander's in the rearview mirror with silent communication I am beginning to recognize as their particular shorthand. In the SUV, reaction sets in properly, and I start shaking uncontrollably, my hands trembling so badly I cannot hold them still, no matter how hard I try to force them steady. Alexander pulls me across the seat and into his arms without a word, gathering me against his chest, where I can hear his heartbeat strong and fast beneath his shirt. I am crying without meaning to, hot tears that come from somewhere deep and terrified, the adrenaline crash hitting me like a physical wave that leaves me defenseless against the emotions I held back during the actual crisis. He holds me close and murmurs reassurances in a mix of English and Italian, words I do not all understand, but that soothe anyway, through pure tone and the warmth of his breath against my hair. At the estate, he takes me directly to his own rooms, instead of the bedroom I have been occupying, and I do not question it, because I cannot bear the thought of being separated from him right now, when my body still remembers the cold press of Chamberlain's gun against my temple. He sits me down on the leather sofa in his private sitting room and pours whiskey into a heavy crystal glass, pressing it into my shaking hands. I drink it, gratefully, and the burn down my throat is grounding, pulling me back into my body and this moment. He kneels before me and cleans a small cut on my cheek with careful touches, a wound I did not even notice getting in the chaos, but that must have come from flying glass or concrete. His touch is incredibly gentle, at odds with the violence those same hands committed less than an hour ago. I catch his hand when he finishes, holding it against my cheek, and our eyes meet with everything we have not said pulsing between us like a living current. He tells me he thought he had lost me, his voice rough with emotion he is not trying to hide anymore. I say I thought I had lost him too, and the admission cost me something to voice. He admits in a low, intense tone that he cannot do this anymore, cannot pretend he does not feel everything he feels, cannot keep maintaining distance and pretending she is just a responsibility or an obligation. I ask what he feels, needing to hear it spoken aloud. Instead of answering with words, he kisses me, his mouth claiming mine with fierce, desperate intensity that is full of all the fear and relief and want we have been circling around for days. I kiss back with equal intensity, my hands fisting in his shirt to pull him closer, pouring everything I feel into the connection of our mouths. When we break apart, we are both breathing hard, and his forehead rests against mine, as we share air and space, and this fragile, perfect moment of being alive together against all odds. Clara and Alexander do not leave his rooms for 24 hours, and the world outside ceases to exist as they claim this space for themselves with desperate need and startling tenderness. They make love with urgent intensity first, driven by adrenaline and fear and the sharp relief of being alive when they came so close to death in that warehouse. His hands map her body with reverent attention, and she learns the scars on his skin with her fingertips, each one a story of violence survived. Then later they come together more tenderly, with slow exploration and whispered words that mean more than the pleasure, though the pleasure is devastating in its completeness. Between these joining moments they sleep tangled together in his massive bed, with her head on his chest, where she can hear his heartbeat steady and strong beneath her ear. In the dark spaces between sleeping and waking, they talk with the honesty that comes when all pretense has been stripped away by crisis. He tells her about the burden of his name, how Alexander Sinclair is both armor and cage, about the violence he has committed with his own hands and ordered done by others, about the impossibility of leaving this life when it is woven into every aspect of his identity and power structure. She listens without judgment and tells him about her own truths, about the loneliness that became her constant companion after her mother died, about building a small, safe existence that felt more like hiding than living, about her fear of wanting too much, because wanting leads to loss. He asks what she wants now in this moment, with his fingers tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. She tells him the truth without hesitation, that she wants him and this connection, and whatever life they can build, despite everything stacked against them. He warns her again about the danger, as though he cannot stop himself from trying to protect her, even from this choice, reminding her that his enemies will always see her as a weakness to exploit. She points out with pragmatic calm that she has already been held at gunpoint by his rival and nearly died in the crossfire, that she understands the reality of his world more clearly than most ever will. He searches her face in the dim light filtering through the heavy curtains and sees her certainty, her clear-eyed acceptance of what being with him means. He accepts her choice finally, and the relief in his expression is profound, years of loneliness releasing their grip as he pulls her close again. In the morning, they emerge from his private sanctuary to find Grace in the breakfast room, smiling with knowing warmth, and no surprise whatsoever at seeing them appear together. Henry is professionally blank-faced as always, but Clara catches his small nod of approval directed at Alexander when he thinks she is not looking. Alexander is different in subtle ways that probably only those who know him well can perceive, more at ease in his own skin, the tension he carries like armor slightly loosened. His hand finds Clara naturally as they move through the space, small touches that ground and connect them. Grace pours coffee and makes light conversation about nothing important, giving them space to adjust to this new reality. And Clara feels herself settling into this strange new life with surprising ease. She belongs here now, not as a prisoner or an obligation, but as something else entirely, something that does not have a name yet, but feels solid and real and worth fighting for. The days that follow settle into a new rhythm that feels both surreal and surprisingly natural as Clara moves her things from the guest bedroom into Alexander's private suite without discussion, because they both understand she belongs there now in his space and his bed and his life. She meets more of his organization, the men who form his inner circle. And while some regard her with suspicion, at first they come to accept her presence when they see how Alexander is with her, how his edges soften slightly when she enters a room, even as he conducts business that involves territories and shipments and negotiations backed by implicit violence. Henry becomes something like a friend, his dry humor emerging in unexpected moments, and he assigns himself as her personal security when Alexander cannot be with her himself, a role he takes with absolute seriousness. Claire returns to her apartment under heavy guard to collect more belongings, and the space feels foreign now, too small, and empty. The life she lived there belonging to someone else entirely, a woman who existed in careful isolation without understanding how lonely she truly was. Eleanor finally gets to see her after days of carefully monitored phone calls, and her friend arrives at the estate with wide eyes and barely concealed alarm, pulling Clara aside to demand if she is being held against her will or if Stockholm Syndrome has addled her brain completely. Clara tries to explain what she barely understands herself, that she chose this with clear eyes, that Alexander is more than the dangerous man the world sees, that she has found something real in the most unlikely place imaginable. Eleanor remains skeptical, but softens when she sees them together at dinner, the way Alexander's attention tracks Clara constantly, the gentle possessiveness in how he touches her lower back when passing her chair, the brief smile that transforms his severe face when Clara teases him about his habit of brooding over reports at 2 in the morning. Grace hosts the dinner with warm charm that puts Eleanor slightly at ease and shares embarrassing stories about Alexander as a serious, intense teenager, which makes Clara laugh and Alexander protest with mock indignation that nonetheless has real affection beneath it. After Eleanor leaves with promises to stay in close contact and threats of bodily harm if Alexander hurts her friend, Clara finds herself alone with him in the library, where firelight casts moving shadows across leather furniture and floor-to-ceiling books. He pulls her onto his lap in the wingback chair and asks if she regrets this choice, now that her friend has voiced all the logical objections, if seeing Eleanor has reminded her of the normal life she gave up. Clara considers the question seriously, because he deserves honesty, and then tells him no, she does not regret it, that normal was another word for half alive, and she would rather have this dangerous, complicated real thing than safe emptiness. He kisses her with the fierce gratitude of a man who expected loss and found grace instead, his hands framing her face as though she is something precious and breakable, despite having seen her survive a gun to her head, with courage he still marvels at when he lets himself think about how close he came to losing her. Business cannot stop even for personal transformation, and Alexander returns to the demands of his organization, with Clara now integrated into his daily life, in ways that surprise both of them with their naturalness. She sits in on meetings when he allows it, learning the structure of his empire, the territories and agreements and fragile truces that maintain order in the city's underworld. And while some of his associates clearly disapprove of her presence, their objections remain unspoken because Alexander's authority is absolute and his claim on her obvious in every protective gesture. Henry briefs them over breakfast about Chamberlain's organization, which is fracturing without its leader as lieutenants scramble for control and create opportunities for Alexander to absorb territory and assets with minimal resistance. Clara listens to discussions of violence and acquisition with a detachment that should disturb her, but instead feels like necessary education about the world she chose to inhabit. Alexander watches her during these meetings, searching for signs of regret or horror, and she meets his gaze steadily to show him she is still here, still certain, still his. In the afternoons, she returns to her design work, taking video calls with clients from Alexander's study while he works across the room at his own desk, their parallel focus creating an intimacy of shared space and purpose. Eleanor visits again and brings another friend from Clara's previous life, a coworker named James who expresses concern that borders on accusation about her isolation from everyone who cares about her. Clara finds herself defending Alexander and her choices with a fierceness that surprises her, explaining that she is not a victim or a prisoner, but a woman who found something real in impossible circumstances. James remains unconvinced, and his skepticism creates tension until Alexander enters and reads the situation with the acute perception that makes him dangerous, suggesting mildly that perhaps James should leave if he cannot be respectful in Alexander's home. The threat beneath the courtesy is unmistakable, and James departs quickly, leaving Eleanor to apologize and Clara to feel torn between her old life and her new one. That evening, she asks Alexander if she will lose everyone from before because they cannot understand what she has become. He admits that his world demands separation from normal life, that the people he allows close must be trustworthy and discreet, that her friends will likely drift away as the gap between their realities widens. The truth hurts, but she appreciates his honesty and asks if it was worth it for him, choosing this life or having it chosen for him. He tells her he never had the choice, but if he did, he would choose differently, choose freedom and anonymity and safety. But then he would never have met her, and that thought is unbearable now. She kisses him for the answer, for the vulnerability, for choosing to let her in despite every instinct that tells him love is liability in his world. A month passes in what feels like suspended time, where Clara fully inhabits Alexander's world and discovers both its harsh realities and unexpected depths, as she attends gatherings where dangerous men conduct business over expensive wine, and their elegant wives assess her with cool calculation before deciding whether to accept or freeze her out. She learns the unspoken rules quickly because survival in this world demands keen observation, understanding that certain topics are never discussed openly, and that loyalty is the only currency that truly matters, and that weakness invites destruction from enemies, always circling at the edges. Alexander involves her more in the legitimate businesses that front his operations, discovering she has genuine talent for branding and visual strategy that could be useful in expanding his corporate holdings. And Clara finds satisfaction in contributing something beyond just being the woman he protects. Henry's wife Julia visits, and Clara likes her immediately. This sharp, funny woman who has navigated Alexander's world for 8 years and understands its costs intimately. And over coffee, Julia offers advice without judgment about maintaining identity when loving a man whose life could consume everything if she allows it. Alexander's possessiveness intensifies, rather than diminishes, as the threat of Chamberlain fades into memory, his need to know where she is, and that she is safe bordering on excessive, until Clara confronts him about the difference between protection and control. They argue in his office with Henry diplomatically absent, and voices rise as she tells him she will not become a caged bird even for the man she loves, that she chose this life but on her terms, not as an accessory to his. The word love hangs between them because she has not said it before despite showing it in every choice, and Alexander goes very still as though the admission has struck something vital and vulnerable beneath all his armor. He crosses to her and frames her face in his scarred, dangerous hands and tells her he loves her with an intensity that borders on desperation, that she has become the center of everything, and it terrifies him because love is the greatest liability a man in his position can have. She kisses him hard and promises she is not going anywhere, that they will figure out how to do this together without her losing herself, and without him losing his mind with worry every time she leaves the estate. He agrees to try, to loosen the protective restrictions, to trust that she understands the dangers and will take appropriate precautions, and the compromise feels like progress, even though both know his instincts will fight against it. That night, Grace hosts dinner, and announces she is hosting a charity gala in 3 weeks and expects both of them to attend, which means Clara will be introduced publicly as Alexander's partner to the city's elite, who may not know his criminal associations but certainly suspect. The preparation for Grace's gala consumes the next 3 weeks and becomes Clara's first real test of navigating Alexander's world in full public view, where every gesture will be observed and interpreted by people who have known him for years and will judge whether she belongs at his side or represents a weakness to be exploited. Grace takes her shopping in the city's most exclusive boutiques where sales associates fawn over them, and Clara tries on gowns that cost more than she used to earn in months, settling finally on a deep emerald silk that makes her eyes luminous and draws an appreciative sound from Alexander when she models it for him later in his study. He circles her slowly, and his gaze holds heat that has nothing to do with the dress and everything to do with imagining removing it. But he only touches her waist lightly and tells her she will be the most beautiful woman there, which makes her flush with pleasure, despite knowing he is biased beyond reason. Julia visits again and coaches Clara on the social dynamics she will encounter, explaining which families are allied with Alexander and which maintain polite neutrality and which smile while sharpening knives behind their backs, warning that the women will be harder to win over than the men because they will see Clara as either a naive fool or a calculating opportunist, and either judgment comes with contempt. Clara absorbs the information and feels the weight of representation settling on her shoulders because she is not just attending as herself, but as Alexander's partner, and any misstep reflects on him in a world where perception is power and vulnerability invites attack. Alexander seems less concerned than she is, telling her simply to stay close to him and let him handle any difficulties. But she argues that she cannot hide behind him all evening, or she will confirm every assumption that she is merely decorative rather than substantial. He concedes the point with visible reluctance and agrees to let her navigate conversations on her own while remaining nearby, though his protective instincts clearly strain against the compromise. The night of the gala arrives with Clara's nerves stretched tight as she dresses carefully and pins her hair in an elegant twist that Grace's stylist arranged, studying herself in the mirror and seeing someone who looks like she belongs in Alexander's world, even if she still feels like an imposter wearing borrowed confidence. Alexander enters their bedroom in his tuxedo and stops to look at her with an expression that makes her breath catch, because there is desire, certainly, but also pride, and something deeper that looks like wonder, as though he cannot believe she chose him and chose this. He crosses to her and fastens a diamond necklace around her throat, his fingers brushing her skin deliberately, and tells her the stones belong to his mother, and he wants her to wear them tonight as a visible symbol of her place in his life. The gesture moves her profoundly because she understands the significance in his world, where such jewelry represents not just wealth but legacy and claim, and she turns to kiss him softly in gratitude and promise. They arrive at the historic hotel, where Grace has arranged the gala, and immediately become the center of attention as heads turn and conversations pause, while the city's elite assess this development in Alexander Sinclair's usually private life. The ballroom glitters with crystal chandeliers and champagne flutes catching light as Clara and Alexander move through the crowd together, and she feels the weight of scrutiny like physical pressure against her skin as conversations pause mid-sentence when they approach, and eyes track their progress across the marble floor. With calculation, she can almost hear audibly clicking behind polite smiles. Alexander's hand rests at the small of her back, warm through the silk of her gown, a claiming touch that broadcasts ownership in a language this world understands, even as Clara feels her own autonomy bristling slightly against the possessive gesture, despite knowing it serves a purpose in this arena of power plays and territorial displays. Grace materializes beside them with a silver-haired man she introduces as Vincent Moretti, an associate of Alexander's late father, and his assessment of Clara is thorough and uncomfortably penetrating before he pronounces her a surprising choice, but perhaps a wise one, which Clara cannot decide is compliment or insult, though Alexander's fingers tighten fractionally against her back, suggesting he heard the ambiguity too. She's introduced to a succession of people whose names blur together, wealthy developers and corporate executives and socialites dripping diamonds, and she smiles until her face aches while fielding questions designed to probe her background and intentions with varying degrees of subtlety. A woman named Dominique Laurent, sleek and predatory in black silk, examines Clara with unconcealed disdain and asks how she and Alexander met with such pointed interest that Clara knows any answer will be dissected for weakness. She opts for partial truth, saying they met during a security situation and his protection proved invaluable, which is vague enough to deflect while hinting at the danger that validates her presence in his world. Dominique's smile sharpens, and she mentions that Alexander has always been so protective of his assets, the word choice deliberate and cutting. But before Clara can respond, Alexander intercepts smoothly, telling Dominique that Clara is not an asset but his partner, and the distinction matters, his voice carrying enough edge that Dominique actually retreats with murmured apologies. Clara feels gratitude and irritation in equal measure, because she wanted to handle that herself, but also recognizes she just witnessed Alexander publicly defining their relationship in terms that grant her status, rather than diminish her to possession. Henry appears at Alexander's elbow with another man who needs his attention regarding some business matter, and Alexander hesitates visibly before Clara tells him to go. She'll be fine, though his reluctance is palpable as he leaves her with Grace, who loops an arm through Clara's companionably. Grace guides her toward a group of women and performs introductions, and Clara finds herself grateful for the older woman's implicit endorsement as it smooths her reception among Alexander's social circle. She talks about her design work when asked, discovering that several women are genuinely interested rather than merely polite, and Julia appears at some point to join the conversation, which becomes easier with an ally present. Across the room, she catches Alexander's gaze, and something passes between them, a moment of connection that steadies her, and she realizes this is her life now, learning to navigate these dangerous, elegant waters beside a man whose world demands strength. She is still discovering within herself. The gala winds down past midnight as guests begin departing in clusters of expensive perfume and satisfied conversation. And Clara finds herself genuinely tired rather than just performing exhaustion as an escape, because the evening demanded more emotional energy than she anticipated in navigating the complex social dynamics of Alexander's world, where every interaction carries layers of meaning she is only beginning to decipher. Alexander appears at her side as she's saying goodbye to Julia, who gives her an encouraging smile and whispered assurance that she handled herself beautifully tonight, and his hand slides around her waist with familiar possessiveness that now feels comforting rather than confining, because she has learned to read the difference between his protective instincts and genuine restriction of her autonomy. Grace kisses both their cheeks and tells them she's proud of how they presented themselves as a united front, her eyes twinkling with pleasure at this development in her nephew's previously solitary existence. And Clara realizes she has gained not just Alexander, but an entire network of relationships that come with accepting her place in his life. The drive back to the estate is quiet, both of them drained from hours of performance and vigilance, and Clara slips off her heels with a groan of relief that makes Alexander smile as his thumb traces circles on her knee with absent affection. She studies his profile in the passing streetlights, and marvels at how completely her life has transformed in the months since that mistaken text message sent her careening into his dangerous orbit. How the woman who lived cautiously in a small apartment designing logos for modest clients has evolved into someone who wears diamonds that belong to a murdered woman and holds her own in conversations with criminals disguised as businessmen. Alexander catches her staring and asks what she's thinking, his voice low and intimate in the darkness of the vehicle. And she tells him the truth without filter, because they have moved past the point of careful editing with each other. She admits she's thinking about how terrified she was that first night when he broke into her apartment with a gun drawn and she believed she might die, and how impossibly far that fear seems now when the same man is the person she trusts most in the world, despite or perhaps because of the danger he represents and controls. His expression shifts through several emotions before settling on something tender and vulnerable that he rarely allows others to see, and he lifts her hand to kiss her knuckles with deliberate gentleness before admitting he thinks about that night constantly and wonders at the strange fortune that brought her accidentally into his life when he had resigned himself to isolation. At the estate, they walk upstairs together, and she lets him unzip her gown with careful attention, his fingers trailing down her spine as the emerald silk pools at her feet, and she turns to face him and begins working the buttons of his shirt with equal focus on the small intimacies that have become their private language. Later, they lie tangled in his bed with moonlight spilling across the sheets, and Clara traces the scars on his chest while he plays with her hair, and she asks if he ever imagined this when he first crashed into her apartment, expecting to find someone in genuine danger. Alexander admits he never imagined anything like her, never anticipated that a wrong number and surveillance equipment would lead to the first real happiness he's known since before his parents died. And the confession costs him something to voice, but he offers it anyway because she has earned his honesty along with everything else. She kisses him slowly and tells him she loves him without fear or hesitation, because the time for protecting herself from this feeling has long passed. And when he returns the words, his voice cracks slightly with the weight of emotions he's kept locked away for years behind walls of necessity and survival. Morning arrives with soft sunlight filtering through the curtains, and Clara wakes wrapped in Alexander's arms with the profound sense that her entire existence has shifted permanently on its axis towards something both terrifying and inevitable, and she lies still for a moment, watching him sleep, his face softer, without the constant vigilance he wears like armor in waking hours. When his eyes open and find hers immediately alert despite the early hour, she sees the same recognition mirrored back, this awareness that they have crossed into territory neither can retreat from even if they wish to, and his hand comes up to cup her face with a tenderness that still surprises her, given the violence those same hands are capable of executing without hesitation. They move through the morning in comfortable silence, sharing coffee in his private sitting room, while Henry delivers reports that Alexander reviews with Clara tucked against his side, and she notices he no longer dismisses her during business discussions, but instead explains context when her expression shows confusion, trusting her with information about shipments and territories and negotiations that integrate her into his world rather than keeping her separate from it. Grace calls to invite them for lunch at her estate, and Alexander accepts with unusual ease, and Clara realizes this is another threshold being crossed, the formal introduction of their relationship to family, and the acknowledgement that she is not temporary or hidden, but claimed openly. The drive to Grace's home takes them through the city, and Clara watches familiar streets pass with strange detachment because her apartment and old life feel like they belong to someone else entirely, a different woman who designed safe corporate logos and spent weekends alone and never imagined that danger could feel like coming home. Grace greets them with delighted approval and ushers them into a sunlit conservatory where lunch is laid out with elegant simplicity, and over wine and conversation Clara learns more about Alexander's childhood, about the boy he was before violence carved him into the man beside her, and she sees how Grace's love has been his anchor through years of darkness. Alexander's phone remains mostly silent, Henry handling the daily operations, and Clara understands this reprieve is deliberate, a space carved out for them to simply exist together without crisis or threat for a few stolen hours. Grace asks about her plans, and Clara admits she hasn't thought beyond the immediate present, her design work abandoned and her apartment a crime scene she cannot return to. And when Alexander tells her she can work from the estate and rebuild her client base with his resources behind her, she hears the offer for what it truly is, a promise of partnership rather than dependence. They discuss practicalities with surprising ease, how she might establish a new studio, which rooms at the estate could be converted, whether she wants to continue freelance work or perhaps expand into something larger, and Clara feels possibility opening before her instead of doors closing. On the drive home, Alexander asks if she truly wants this life, giving her one final chance to choose differently. And she takes his hand and tells him she stopped wanting her old life the moment she understood what it meant to be known completely by another person and chosen anyway, despite every flaw and fear. His grip tightens and he admits he never believed he would find this, never thought his world allowed for genuine connection, and she realizes they are both discovering together what it means to build something real from the wreckage of loneliness and violence. At the estate, they find Henry waiting with news that Chamberlain's organization has fractured in his absence, several lieutenants already making overtures about absorption into Alexander's territory, and the threat that brought them together has dissolved into opportunity. Clara stands beside Alexander as he makes decisions about how to handle the transition, and she understands viscerally that this is her future, these moments of dangerous negotiation balanced against private tenderness, and she discovers she has the strength for both because he has shown her she was never as fragile as she believed herself to be.